Hi, welcome to Healing Tunes. Please watch the video. Today we are discussing about neuroanatomy, central nervous system. The central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord. Brain located in the cranial cavity and the spinal cord located in vertebral canal. Central nervous system is well protected because it is enclosed by the skull, vertebral canal, meninges, and is bathed in cerebrospinal fluid. See, the outermost layer is protected by skull, is the hard bone. Then it's covered the meninges. Again, brain is covered, situated in the cerebrospinal fluid. Then vertebra is covered by the spinal cord. Structurally, the brain and spinal cord consist of gray matter and white matter. Therefore, sections through the CNS present grayish and whitish regions. See the brain outermost layer is the dark space, that is gray matter. Then inner area is the white or light color is white matter. But in spinal cord, outer layer is the white matter and inner layer is gray matter. The gray matter consists of nerve cell bodies and dendrites. The white matter is made up of predominantly of myelinated nerve fibers. See the nucleus and cell body and dendrites form the gray matter. The myelinated axon myelinated sheet is form the white matter. The brain except the brainstem. The gray matter is present at the periphery. The white matter in the center. See the outer layer is the dark area is the gray matter. Then inner light area is the white matter. In the spinal cord, gray matter is present in the center and the white matter at the periphery. See the periphery is the white matter. Then inner layer is the gray matter. And function of the brain. It receives information from and controls the activities of trunk and limbs mainly through its connections with the spinal cord. Next is it receives the information from and control the activities of head and neck structures through cranial nerves. It assimilates experiences, a requisite to higher mental process such as memory, learning, and intelligence. It is also responsible for one's personality, thoughts, and aspirations. Next is the parts of the brain. The brain mainly main parts is first one is cerebrum, second is the diencephalon, third is the midbrain, then pons, medulla, then cerebellum. See the picture. This is the parts. First part is the cerebrum. The cerebrum is the largest part of the brain. It consists of two large hemispheres, right hemisphere and left hemisphere, which occupy the anterior and middle cranial fossa and supratentorial area of posterior cranial fossa. Each cerebral hemisphere consists of a surface layer of gray matter called cerebral cortex and a central core of white matter. In the basal part of the latter are located large masses of gray matter known as basal nucleus or ganglia. The two hemispheres are partly separated from each other by a deep median longitudinal fissure called longitudinal cerebral fissure. See the longitudinal fissure. The surface of cerebral hemisphere is convoluted, that is, it has a series of elevations, the gyri, separated by shallow depression in the sulci or deep grooves called fissures. A central sulcus which runs downward and forward from the supromedial border to the lateral sulcus is located about midway along the length of the hemisphere. There are individual differences in the appearance of the sulci and gyri, but some sulci are constant in their position and appearance and serve as an important landmark. The superlateral surface of each cerebral hemisphere is divided into four lobes: frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and temporal lobe. Frontal lobe is anterior to the central sulcus and above the lateral sulcus. Frontal lobe is important for voluntary motor function, motivation, aggression, emotions, effort, drive, and awareness of self. Second part is the parietal lobe. Second part is the parietal lobe. This lobe is posterior to the central sulcus and above the lateral sulcus. Parietal lobe is the major center for reception and evaluation of all sensory informations except for smell, hearing, and vision. Third part is the occipital lobe, that is the yellow part. Occipital lobe is behind a line extending from parieto-occipital sulcus to the pre-occipital notch. Occipital lobe is responsible for reception and integration of visual input. Then fourth part is the temporal lobe, that is green area. Temporal lobe is below the lateral sulcus and in front of the pre-occipital notch. The temporal lobe receives and evaluates input for smell and hearing and plays an important role in memory. Then functions of cerebrum: conscious perception of sensory modalities, conscious motor activity, cognition, the intellectual functions or ways of knowing and thinking, including the process of receiving, imagining, remembering, reasoning, and judging. Function of basal ganglia: control of muscular activity and posture, largely inhibit unintentional movement. Limbic system: autonomic response to smell, emotion, mood, recent memory, etc. Next part is the diencephalon. The diencephalon is the part of the brain between the cerebrum and brainstem. Its main parts is the two thalamus, then hypothalamus, metathalamus, epithalamus, and subthalamus. First part is the thalamus. The two thalami form by a form by far the largest mass of the diencephalon and are separated by each other by a cavity of third ventricle and joined with each other by an interthalamic addition. Each thalamus is a large ovoid mass of nuclei lying obliquely across the path of cerebral peduncle as it ascends into the cerebral hemisphere. Functions of thalamus: major sensory replay center, influences mood and movement. Next part is the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is the most inferior portion of the diencephalon and contains several small nuclei and nerve tracts. The most conspicuous nuclei called mammillary bodies appear as a rounded elevation of the base of the brain in the region of interpeduncular fossa. Next part is the metathalamus. The metathalamus consists of two rounded medial and lateral geniculate bodies which protrude from the posterior inferior surface of the thalamus. The medial and lateral geniculate bodies form the relay station for the special sense of hearing and vision, respectively. Next part is the epithalamus. The epithalamus is a small area of diencephalon. Posterior superior to the thalamus, it consists of pineal gland. Next is the subthalamus. The subthalamus is a small area of diencephalon that lies between the thalamus and midbrain. It contains several nerve tracts and thalamic nuclei which are associated with basal ganglia and are involved in controlling motor function. Next is the function of hypothalamus, major control center for maintaining homeostasis and regulating endocrine function. Function of the subthalamus, associated with basal ganglia and help in coordinating motor function. Epithalamus function is sleep wake cycle control and smell. Next part is the brainstem. It stem like part of the brain between forebrain and the spinal cord. It consists of three components from above downwards: midbrain, pons, and medulla. Function of brainstem is contain ascending and descending nerve tract, houses nuclei of all cranial nerve except first and second cranial nerve. In the brainstem, first part is the midbrain. The midbrain is the smallest segment of the brainstem. It is just superior to the pons and contains the nuclei of third cranial nerve, oculomotor, fourth cranial nerve, trochlear, and fifth cranial nerve, trigeminal. The midbrain is transferred by the cerebral aqueduct. The part of dorsal to the aqueduct is called tectum and consists of four surface elevations: the corpora quadrigemina, the superior and inferior colliculae receive visual and auditory impulses respectively and are concerned with reflexes involving these senses. The part visceral to the aqueduct is divided into right and left halves. The cerebral peduncles. Each cerebral peduncle consists of central part, the tegmentum, which is separated ventrally from cus cerebrae by the mass of pigmented gray matter, the substantia nigra. The tegmentum largely consists of ascending tract from the spinal cord to the thalamus and contain two large cigar-shaped nuclei called red nuclei. The cross section, the red nuclei appear as oval masses of pinkish gray matter. The red nuclei help in unconscious regulation and coordination of motor activities. Function of midbrain is visual and auditory reflex center. Next part is the pons. The pons is the large middle part of the brainstem. It is continuous above with the midbrain and below with the medulla oblongata. It is also named because it forms a broad bridge between two cerebellar hemispheres by its transverse fissure continuing the middle cerebral peduncle. The vertical median sulcus on its vertebral aspect lodges the basilar artery and therefore termed basilar sulcus. The ventral portion contains large number of nuclei. The pontine nuclei and longitudinal bundle of descending fibers of pyramidal tract. The pontine nuclei relay information from cerebrum to the cerebellum. Cortico-pontocerebellar pathway. The dorsal portion or tegmentum of Pons contain important pontine sleep and respiratory centers. The pontine respiratory center functions with the respiratory center in the medulla to help control the respiratory movements. Functions of the pons relay center between cerebrum and cerebellum house sleep center. Next part is the medulla. The medulla oblongata is the lower part of the brainstem and it continues inferiorly with the spinal cord at the foramen magnum. On the ventral aspect of medulla, there are two pyramid shaped elevations, one on either side of median plane called pyramids. These elevations are produced by the descending fibers of the corticospinal tracts involved in the conscious control of skeletal muscles. Lateral to the pyramids, there are two rounded oval elevations called olives contain inferior olivary nuclei. Dorsal to each olive is an inferior cerebellar peduncle. On the dorsal aspect, the medulla has cunate and gracile tubercle produced by similarly named nuclei on either side of median plane. Medulla contains various vital autonomic centers responsible for several reflexes, such as those involved in regulation of the heart rate, blood vessel diameter, breathing, swallowing, vomiting, coughing, and sneezing. The function of medulla center for several vital autonomic reflexes, heart rate, breathing, swallowing, and vomiting, etc. Next part of the brain is cerebellum. The cerebellum lies dorsal to the pons and medulla and consists of two lateral hemisphere, the cerebellar hemisphere and median worm-like part called vermis. It is connected to the midbrain, pons and medulla by superior, middle and inferior cerebellar peduncles respectively. The surface of cerebellum has narrow transverse ridges called folia, separated by deep fissures. Functionally, the cerebellum is mainly concerned with involuntary control of somatic motor activities, essential for maintenance of equilibrium, muscle tone, and posture, control of muscle movement and tone, regulates extent of intentional movements. Next is the attachment of the cranial nerves. In the human brain, 12 cranial nerves. The first cranial nerve is olfactory nerve. There are about 20 olfactory nerves on each side. They arise from olfactory epithelium of nasal cavity and passes through the cribriform plate of ethmoid and end in the olfactory bulb, which lies on the orbital surface of the frontal lobe. They are so delicate that no trace of them is seen on the olfactory bulb when the brain is removed from the cranial cavity. Second cranial nerve is the optic nerve. This is a thick cylindrical nerve which arises from the retina and joins the anterolateral angle of the optic chiasma. Third nerve is oculomotor nerve. It emerges from the groove on the medial aspect of the cerebral peduncle in the posterior part of the interpeduncular fossa. Fourth is the trochlear nerve. It is a slender nerve which emerges on the dorsal aspect of the midbrain, lateral to the median plane. It winds round the lateral aspect of the midbrain toward the interpeduncular fossa, immediately superior to the pons. Next is the trigeminal nerve. It is largest of the cranial nerve and attached to the junction of the pons and middle cerebral peduncle by two roots, a large lateral sensory root and a small medial motor roots. Next is the abducens nerve. It emerges at the inferior border of the pons opposite to the upper end of pyramid. Seventh cranial nerve is the facial nerve. It emerges at the inferior border of the pons lateral to the abducens nerve by two roots, a thick medial motor root and the slender lateral sensory root called nervus intermedius. Next is the vestibulocochlear nerve. It consists of two nerves, vestibular and cochlear, which are attached in the cerebellopontine angle. The cochlear nerve lies posterior to the inferior cerebral peduncle and vestibular anterior to it. Glossopharyngeal nerve. It emerges by number of rootlets from a groove between olive and inferior cerebellar peduncle. 10th cranial nerve is the vagus nerve. It also emerges by number of rootlets from a groove between the olive and inferior cerebellar peduncle below the rootlets of glossopharyngeal nerve. 11th cranial nerve is accessory nerve. It has two parts, cranial and spinal. The cranial part emerges by the number of rootlets from medulla below the rootlets of vagus nerve, and it is joined by spinal part, the rootlets of which are attached to the upper five cranial cervical spinal segments. 12th cranial nerve is hypoglossal nerve. It arises by a row of rootlets from a groove between the pyramid and olive. In the central nervous system, next part is the spinal cord. The spinal cord is the long cylindrical lower part of the central nervous system, occupying in the upper two-thirds of the vertebral canal. It continues uh, rostrally with the medulla oblongata at the foramen magnum and end caudally as tapered conus medullaris at the level of lower border of first lumbar vertebra L1. It gives origin to 31 pairs of spinal nerves. The region of origin of the pair of spinal nerves is called spinal segment. The spinal cord has central gray matter and periphery white matter. The transverse section in the gray matter has an irregular H shape and looking somewhat similar to a butterfly, with two anterior horn, right and left, and two posterior horn and a gray commissure containing a central canal. In the thoracic and upper two lumbar segments, there are also lateral horn. Because these segments of spinal cord are associated with the autonomic nervous system. In three-dimensional view of gray matter of a spinal segment in the horn appear as long vertical pillars. In each half of the spinal cord, the white matter is divided into anterior, lateral, and posterior white columns or funiculae. Next is the meninges and cerebrospinal fluid. The brain and spinal cord are surrounded by three protective members called meninges. From within outward, these are pia matter, arachnoid matter, and dura matter. The subarachnoid space between the pia and arachnoid matter contains the cerebrospinal fluid and the major arteries. That's all about the overview of central nervous system. Later we will discussing the each and every part in detail. Next session we are discussing the peripheral nervous system and overview. Please subscribe the channel, like the video and share it. Thank you for watching our channel.